I'm going to talk through The Necklace by Guy de Maupassant. This is in preparation for your Edexcel IGCSE English Language exam, paper 2. As I've done for another short story, I shan't be reading through the whole thing line by line, so please make sure you read through the short story at least twice and you give yourself some time to write down your own interpretations before you listen to mine. I'm only going to talk about the most important sections of this short story that I think provide you with some good material to walk into an exam with. As always, it's only my opinion, so of course you can always disagree with it. So looking at the title, The Necklace, the focus of the title is about an object, and I would say this focus represents or mirrors Mathilde's obsession with material wealth. Moreover, thinking about a necklace, you might argue that one's jewellery can be a good indication of one's wealth. And what we will learn later on is that's not quite the case for Mathilde, but that's certainly the way she sees the necklace in this story, that it gives her the ability to create an image of herself as someone much wealthier than she actually is. So looking at the first two paragraphs, I would say there are two things that we take from these. The first one I'm going to focus on is the fact that we learn of Mathilde's social class. So it's immediately established that she is of a lower social position because we learn that she is the daughter of very minor civil servants. The intensifier very stresses just how low her social position is. The capitalization of fate here really emphasizes the lack of control one had at this time over their social class. Mathilde hasn't chosen to be born to these minor civil servants. She hasn't been able to choose what social class they belong to. So I would argue that's the reason why fate is capitalized. And because of her social position, she has no dowry, no expectations, no means of meeting some rich, important man. So the triplets here enforce a sense of hopelessness that one would have of her social ranking. And the negative language, no, 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 just creates this sense that she has no options. She is incredibly restricted by her social position. And so what does she do? She ends up marrying a junior clerk, and that would be someone who's really of lower middle class. So what I would argue here, other than the techniques I've already mentioned, you'll want to mention the fact that this is immediately established because that's showing your understanding of structure. And the fact that Maupassant has decided to mention this, or for it to be one of the first things that's mentioned about Mathilde, tells us that the society she has been born into finds that important about her. So your social position was incredibly important at this time, this being late 1800s France. What else do we learn? We learn that beauty is a woman's currency. So the other thing in these first two paragraphs is we learn what she looks like. The first adjective to describe her is pretty. And then later we learn that actually women have no class. Their beauty, grace and charm do service for birthright and connections. So actually, unlike a man who can earn money during this time and climb up the social ladder, a woman didn't have that type of social mobility. And so the only way they could improve their position in society was through their beauty and in hope that they would be beautiful enough to attract the attention of a rich man and marry him. But have a look at the triplets here, beauty, grace and charm. These are really quite attributes that aren't really very deep and meaningful, are they? They're surface attributes. They don't really represent what's within someone. So even being graceful and charming, you might argue, is something that you can just put on for an evening to be nice to people. It doesn't necessarily represent the person that you are inside. So what do we learn? We learn that Mathilde has this great sense of entitlement, and I would go as far to say that she has delusions of grandeur. She feels too good for the life that she has, despite having been born of a low social class. So she felt that she was intended for a life of refinement and luxury. And really, those nouns, refinement and luxury, focus again on material things. There's no talk here about desiring a fulfilling life of love, for instance, which we learn she has because she has a really loving husband. And when she looks at her apartment, how is it described? It is run down, it's peeling, it's battered, it's ugly. And for her, it is torture, and it makes her very angry. So yes, okay, these adjectives do imply poverty, but the way it affects her, the fact that it's torturous and it makes her angry, already suggests to us that she's quite melodramatic. And I think what's really important here is that we have a peasant girl. So she has a maid who's a peasant girl, and she's an important reminder that Mathilde isn't as poor as she seems to think she is. There are people in this society that are much, much worse off than her, but because she is so self-obsessed, so self-absorbed, it is impossible for her to look around and gain perspective and realise that she's lucky, and realise the things around her that she should be grateful for, one of them being her husband. So I think having the presence of this peasant girl is really important. It's a good reminder that there are people worse off, and we're going to find her in a very similar position, you might argue, to this peasant girl in the end. So it's also quite ironic that she should refer to her as a spectacle. And then what do we notice? She seems to daydream a lot about the life that she would love to have. So we've got this kind of repetition of she dreamed of. So the fact that she does dream of these wonderful things makes her desires seem fanciful and really kind of over the top. The alliteration as well throughout this daydream really represents her excitement at thinking about these things, but also the importance that she awards to material objects. Again, nowhere here does she really talk about finding love. She talks about where is it here? And just made for intimate talk at 5 p.m. with one's closest friends, who would be the most famous and sought after men of the day, whose attentions were much more, and so on. So, you know, she daydreams about men, but not a man that loves her, just to be around people who are the most famous and sought after. So there's almost something quite competitive about her, but she's absolutely totally superficial, and the listing here highlights that. There's nothing of substance in this list. Have a look then at her husband and the dialogue used for him. So she's there serving him stew. Stew, splendid. There's nothing I like better than a nice stew. So the husband, you might argue, is the antithesis of Mathilde. And you could even zoom in a bit further and say kind of the exclamations here show his excitement and how grateful he is. And, you know, he likes the simple things. He's that excited over a nice stew, and that contrasts, doesn't it, to this long list of elaborate things that she wishes for. But this also, I think, encourages a great dislike for Mathilde amongst the readers. We've got this wonderful husband who is encouraging, who is loving, and she just seems so unbelievably ungrateful. So I think it's important, again, that he is so lovely. And again, he's important for perspective as well. He doesn't take for granted the things that he has in his life, unlike her. You might also focus on the adjectives mythical and enchanted, because she really is, her dreams, her desires are really far off. They're extremely unlikely. She's not just wishing for a bit of a better life. They're just totally unrealistic. And of course, we're going to learn that, she should have been happy with what she had. And then we come to, she had no fine dresses, no jewellery, nothing. So we've got stress, the triplets here, stress, a lack of material wealth. It's really important that comes just after hearing how wonderful her husband is. Because this nothing is clearly a hyperbole. And it indicates how melodramatic she is. But it's also offensive. She's got a loving husband. She has a girl that they can afford to do some household chores. She's got a roof over her head. She's got food to eat. She doesn't have nothing. And it just highlights how ungrateful she is for the things that she has. And again, to support this idea that she has delusions of grandeur, she felt that God had made her for such things. So there's just this sense of entitlement that she is much better than what she has. And again, to support this idea that she's melodramatic, we have this listing of, you might say, a semantic field of grief, sorrow, regret, despair, anguish. So you can just imagine how melodramatic this woman is. And again, all of this just encourages us to really dislike her. Supporting this idea that the husband is loving is when he presents this invitation. So he looks highly pleased with himself. He mentions how difficult it was to get hold of an invite. So it's something he's really tried hard to do, knowing it would mean a huge thing for his wife. The words die in his throat, so even he's trying to help, and there's almost a sense that he's getting nervous because his wife is unhappy still, and he's totally disconcerted and dismayed by the fact that his wife is crying. So we're really encouraged to like and pity the husband, who seems so loving and attentive, in great contrast to his wife, who is incredibly selfish and ungrateful. And again, this just further encourages the reader to dislike Mathilde. And to support that, have a look at the way she treats him. Look at the verbs and adverbs used. She tossed the invitation. She peevishly onto the table and muttered. So there's something quite brattish and spoiled about her. She looks at him irritably. She speaks to him shortly. And then she says, nothing, it's just that I haven't got anything to wear, and consequently I shan't be going to any reception. Give the invite to one of your colleagues with a wife who is better off for clothes than I am. So first of all, we learn that she's superficial. Okay, she doesn't want to go to the party because she doesn't feel like she has nice enough clothes. So we learn that her appearance is much more important than her experience. And again, this comes back to this idea of having a certain image, but not necessarily having the substance behind it. But I would say also she's really manipulative, because this is actually a dig at her husband. Give the invite to one of your colleagues with a wife who is better off for clothes than I am. I read that as a dig at her husband, because being a woman in that time, it would be the man who would have to buy his wife nice clothes and so on. She wouldn't have the money to do it herself. So I really think this is her being really quite cruel to her husband. And it worked. He was devastated. The short sentence really brings our attention to the fact that he is devastated, and it makes us realize how deflated he is. He was so excited to give that invite, and now he's just completely broken by what she said and incredibly disappointed with how she has responded. Look how calculating she is. So he asks, how much do you think you would need? And she's working out her sums, but also wondering how much she could decently ask for without drawing an immediate refusal. So she's not just simply answering the question of how much a dress would be. She's really trying to figure out in her mind how she could get the most out of him. And she asks for 400 francs, and he just so happens to have exactly that amount of money, which he was supposed to use for a hunting trip. Is that a coincidence, or does she know about that money? So maybe she could have got something for 200, but she's decided to say 400 because she knows it's available. And look at his selflessness. This means he is going to give up his hunting trip so his wife can have a nice dress. I'll give you your 400 francs. So again, his selflessness contrasts to how self-centered Mathilde is, and it just encourages us even more to dislike her and to pity him. But despite that, she still is unhappy. So she appears sad, worried, anxious. That should say asyndetic. There, I don't know why it's. That must have been autocorrect. That's one word. So her grief, I would argue, the asyndetic listing suggests that her grief is endless. She's never going to be happy, and you might even link that to a wider message. She's never going to be happy because she's looking for happiness in the wrong places, in the material wealth that she doesn't have. But it just really shows that she's incredibly spoilt. There's nothing that's going to make her happy. And again, supporting this melodrama, I'll look like a church mouse. So this poor husband's given up 400 francs and it's still not enough. Apparently she'll look like a church mouse. Look how practical the husband is. Okay, he suggests wearing a posy, and that contrasts to the diamond necklace, which highlights how different the husband and wife are in this short story. He's much more practical, whereas she wants a diamond necklace. And then looking at the dialogue here, there's nothing so humiliating as to look poor. So she's preoccupied with appearances. This is quite ironic as well. You could link this to later because she's talking about looking poor. Remember, she is obsessed with perception, with her image. She doesn't really care so much about the substance behind it. She wants to wear a really fancy dress that they can't really afford because she cares so much about looking rich. And again, here, there's nothing so humiliating as to look poor. This is ironic because she's going to become poor. So she thinks this is humiliating. Wait until the end when she's haggling and she's scrubbing the floors and whatever else. And then she goes to her friends. You could mention, I haven't highlighted this, but earlier on it did mention that she lost contact with her friend because she couldn't handle being around someone who was richer than her. It made her really upset. So again, here comes this woman who's totally self-absorbed, who can't even hold on to a friendship because of her jealousy. And she doesn't even value something as important as a friendship because she doesn't want to be reminded of how poor she is. But it's interesting that she soon gets over that and suddenly comes kind of back asking if she can borrow something. So again, she's quite manipulative. She uses people. So look at the semantic field of wealth that really represents her friend. We've got pearls, gold, diamonds. Of course, this is irony as well because we later find out that the necklace, at least the one that she picks out, is an imitation. Maybe all of these are as well. But even despite this list here of these wonderful things, Mathilde says, "Have you got anything else?" And that just really highlights how spoilt she is. She has this insatiable desire. Nothing's ever going to be enough for her. And then the irony, she finds this magnificent diamond necklace. We later find out it's an imitation, and this really encourages us to think about the way we view others and how on the surface we may think we have an idea of one's life, of their wealth, of their happiness, but really we have no idea what's really happening at home or within themselves. And then look at the dramatic change in her demeanour, okay? It reveals how fickle she is. She throws her arms around a friend, she kisses her extravagantly, she runs home, she takes her treasure. That's ironic as well. You could highlight that for irony. This just angers me. She's just been so upset over absolutely nothing, and a diamond necklace, which actually is fake, makes her this happy. This highlights just how materialistic and vain she is. So I think it's important to note when we learn of this evening, they are really just two paragraphs in this whole short story. And so what we should learn from that is, even though these two paragraphs she seems extremely happy, I think it stresses how fleeting one's happiness will be when it relies on superficial means. So if you seek happiness in material wealth, then your happiness will not last very long. And we certainly see this with Mathilde. So she is described as a success. But why is she a success? Because she was the prettiest woman there. So again, we have this idea that beauty equates to happiness, or beauty equates to success. You could link that to the society of Paris that she has kind of grown up in. That's what it was believed a woman should be to be successful. She needs to be beautiful. And she's wonderfully happy. I would say this is irony. It calls into question, is she really happy? Does this last? She's been miserable all the way up to this point, and she's going to be miserable all the way to the end after this moment. Is that true happiness? It's gone so quickly. It relies on material wealth. I would argue she's not truly happy, but she seemed it, or she felt some kind of buzz for a moment. But I would question if this is true happiness. Look at the short sentence here as well, which gives importance to the minister. Remember, she wants the attention of important men, so that has stuck out in her mind. And then look at the diction here, which implies that she's really having this kind of euphoric moment, ecstatically, wildly intoxicated, victorious beauty, glorious success, floating on a cloud of happiness. So it's also quite hyperbolic as well. So it gives an idea of this sense of excitement and sheer joy that she is experiencing. But it's so important to bring it back to this idea that this is short-lived, and it all relies on really a lie. She's wearing a dress she can't really afford, and she's borrowed a necklace that she thinks is real but is actually an imitation. So then when she is ready to leave, the adjectives here contrast with the previous descriptions, where we've got all this excitement through this diction here, okay? And then suddenly we've just got modest, everyday, commonplace. So she's brought right back down to earth, and very quickly reminded of the world she really does belong to. Look at how she treats her husband again. She refused to listen to him when he said stay inside. So she's really quite dismissive. This is important because later she's going to really hang on to his every word when she needs support from him on what to do next. When they walk outside, they're shivering with cold. That pathetic fallacy really mirrors the way she feels. She's incredibly deflated. She starts to describe the taxi or the cab, nocturnal hackney cabs which only emerge in Paris after dusk, as if ashamed to parade their poverty in the full light of day. So it's almost, it really mirrors the way she feels, doesn't it? She's ashamed to parade her poverty. And then look at the street they live on. I'm sure I'm going to butcher this. I am definitely not a French speaker. But it translates to Martyr Street, Rue des Mortes, I think, but I could definitely be wrong in translation there. Sorry, in pronouncing that. This is foreshadowing. So she lives on Martyr Street. This foreshadows the life they both will have to sacrifice. You could go further and say it's actually her husband who really sacrifices rather than her. But she certainly gives up the life that she knew to pay back for the necklace she's about to lose. For her, it was all over, while he was thinking that he would have to be at the ministry at 10. So I think this is a really important sentence, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here talking about a different way of viewing Mathilde. So for her, it's all over. That's a limited moment of happiness for her. Now, you could say this is because she has placed so much importance on superficial things, like having a nice dress and wearing a fancy necklace, while he has work to think of. But I think this might also represent the limited moments of happiness for women in general of this time. Women were confined to the house. They had very little control of their own lives. It was the men who could go out to work and take some control over their life or their quality of life. And you could argue this encourages you to start seeing Mathilde as a victim of the times. So yes, she does seem very superficial, but could it be argued that she has been born into a society that has an obsession with material wealth, that has a social rank? I mean, that's the first two things we learnt about her, that she was beautiful, and that she was of a lower class. So isn't it inevitable that she would end up obsessing over material things and feeling like what she had wasn't enough? So is she actually a victim? That would certainly be an original interpretation. We definitely get the sense that Maupassant doesn't want us to like her, but we could see it from a different lens. So maybe you could offer that as an alternative opinion. And then she loses the necklace. The exclamation reflects complete shock. The ellipses and fragments show the disbelief. She cannot believe what she has done. You could go further. There's kind of shorter sentences here which help build suspense as well. So if you had a question that focused on feelings and experience, you could talk about this moment of panic. Have a look at the way they both handle this situation. Her mind is blank. She stays at home, whereas her husband is much more proactive. He went, he called at, he advertised, he tried. She waited. So there's a real contrast. He's proactive, she's passive. You could argue society has made them that way. The woman was encouraged to be passive. So again, is she a victim? Or you could look at it in the other way and just say the poor husband's doing all the work and it was her fault. But notice now a difference with the way that she views her husband. She wrote to his dictation. She is now following his lead. He's giving her ideas of how they can handle this, and she's following it. Previously, she was incredibly dismissive of him. And I would argue from this point, you start to see a change in their relationship. Notice the pronouns, they. So there's an indication here of unity. They come together to pay off this debt and to very quickly replace the necklace without it being detected by her friend. It's important that we learn that actually the husband has 18,000 francs. Again, important for perspective. They were not as poor as Mathilde felt she was. And then what happens? We have this semantic field of debt. Borrowed, exorbitant rates of interest, moneylenders, mortgaged, and it's just this long list which mirrors this relentless grind, which is really the nature of being in debt. You're constantly, every month, trying to pay it off. Interest gets added and you feel like you've taken 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you definitely get this sense of a relentless grind to pay off this huge debt. Poverty is described as ready to pounce. So we've got this personification as if they were attacked by poverty. Their lives have really been attacked and destroyed by this debt. And then she starts also this horrible life of the very poor. So the intensifier here, grindingly, but also here as well, very, is important because it emphasizes her living conditions, and this, you might argue, is ironic because she thought she was poor before. Now she is very poor, and hopefully is starting to look back and realize what she had. We certainly look back and realize she had much more than she realized. She was determined to pay, They dismissed the maid. They moved out of their apartment and rented an attic. These short sentences show that she is resolute. So there's a strength in her now. She realises she's got to put her head down and get on with it. And she's described as doing all of this heroically. So you might argue at this point we're starting to see a bit of character development for Mathilde. She's not that spoilt brat anymore. She's got a little bit of something to her. And then this paragraph here reveals all the terrible things that she has to do. So she has to do heavy domestic work, ghastly kitchen chores. She wears down her pink nails, washes dirty sheets, and so on. Okay, so this kind of long description of all the horrible things that she has to do, and this really contrasts to her dreams, but also that evening as well. Okay, where everyone was talking about her and noticing her. Now she's frequently abused. So she's not the kind of princess of the night anymore. And again, that just kind of highlights how short-lived that happiness was for her. The temporal marker here each month again supports this feeling of how relentless poverty is. It's just inescapable for them. It just keeps, every month it's the same thing. But eventually they do pay off their debt, but it took 10 years. So this was, again, linking to the street that they lived on, Martyr Street. This was a huge sacrifice. Really, they sacrificed 10 years of their life just to pay off this necklace. And she looks old now, so we know the physical toll of poverty. And this is really knowing that she is so superficial and she cares about the way she looks. This has got to be really hard for Mathilde. She's described as a battling, hard, uncouth housewife. She's untidy. Her skirt's askew, her hands are red, she's got a gruff voice. So this description completely contrasts with that glamorous evening with the beautiful dress and being the prettiest woman in the room. But she still daydreams. She would sit by the window and think of that evening long ago when she had been so beautiful and so admired. But what's interesting here is previously we would see long paragraphs listing all the wonderful things that she would imagine, but now it's just one, not even one whole sentence. So she doesn't get time to daydream, but it does suggest that maybe she hasn't learnt her lesson. She still looks back at the time, that one evening when she was so beautiful and admired. She realised that she needs to still look around her and realise she's got a really supportive husband, for instance. That's one way of looking at it. And then look at this short paragraph here when she starts questioning what might not have happened had she not lost the necklace. Who could tell? Who could possibly tell? Life is so strange, so fickle. How little is needed to make or break us. So the questions show that she's been quite reflective. She's been regretful. So that shows character development. She's starting to think about her actions in the past. The exclamation really show her realisation of how quickly you can lose things. Okay, she lost the life that she had and maybe she shouldn't have taken for granted. And then finally, it's all revealed. So she sees her old friend, and this shows growth because she tells her the truth. She would tell her everything, and she says, well, I lost it. This is great character development. She's chosen honesty. She should have chosen honesty at the beginning. Unfortunately, it's taken her 10 years. Notice the way her friend responds to her. She stammered, but I'm sorry, I don't know, there's some mistake. The ellipses reflect a fear of the poor. And again, come back to this idea that Mathilde has been born into a society where the poor are looked down upon, the poor are feared. Of course, she would want to climb that social ladder. Of course, she would daydream about having more. That is one way of arguing it. And she says to her friend, we had nothing. And again, there's irony there, because if you recall earlier on, she said she had nothing. And now she's starting to realise she had no idea what nothing really was. And look at this, finally, she's described as proud. So she's gained pride from something of substance. hard work before she'd be proud of herself for looking good. And so there is an element here. There's got to be some hint here that she has improved as a person, and she's got much more substance now than she did before. And then, of course, the plot twist that the necklace is an imitation necklace really stresses the importance of honesty. So I would say there's two big messages here. I think one is about being honest. The second, I take the second message for me is more effective. And I think it's about not taking for granted the life that you have, having perspective, looking at those around you, realizing what you have, and also realizing what you have in contrast to others, and not seeking happiness in superficial ways, such as a necklace. As always, please share your opinions in the comment section. I do always read through them and share them with my class. And that's it.